Now, the Planning Applications Committee on Wednesday, the 30th of November 2016. Could I ask everyone to make sure their mobile phones are switched off, and please note that the meeting may be recorded and subsequently made available to the public for listening purposes. Okay. Could you confirm the Sederunt, please, Lucy?
Good morning. We have 15 members present. We are quorate. And I have apologies so far from Councillor Ogilvie and Councillor Ian Crothers, Councillor Blake, Councillor Geddes, Councillor McGregor are not present but may be along later in the meeting. Is there any more apologies to be recorded?
Andy.
Councillor Witts, what's his name there? He's still
and Councillor Witts.
Thank you.
Is that an apology?
Yes, I believe so. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Well, no, you said Councillor Geddes as well, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
An apology. We have 16 members present now.
Thank you. Have we got any declarations of interest? I'll be declaring an interest in item 7 as I'm known to one of the objectors. Okay.
I have declared an interest in item 5 because I have property that adjoins this application.
Anyone else? No more declarations of interest? Thank you. Could we agree the minutes of the previous meeting? Thank you. Could you outline the procedures to be followed, please?
The Planning Applications Committee will consider each application in turn as detailed on the agenda. The case officer or other appointed officer will make a short presentation addressing the determining issues accompanied by digital images. Any late information, amendments or corrections will be reported at this time. Members may ask questions of officers following the presentation on points of clarification. The Chairman has been provided with a list of eligible representatives who have registered to speak at this meeting within the period specified in Council policy. No other persons will be allowed to speak. The Chairman will individually invite those who have registered in advance to speak to make their presentation, after which they may be questioned by committee members. No questions may be asked of members. The order of eligible parties being heard will be as follows: third parties objecting to an application, third parties supporting an application, statutory consultees objecting to an application, elected members of Dumfries and Galloway Council who are not members of the Planning Applications Committee. Such members should withdraw from the committee chamber after making their presentation, applicants or their agents. Representatives have been placed in alphabetical order and a copy of the public speaking list is available from the committee officer taking notes of our proceedings. Presentations will be strictly limited to 3 minutes per person, excepting for national and major developments, which by their very nature are more complex, where the time limit will be 5 minutes. The Chairman of the committee will ask you to come to a conclusion if you take too long. Representatives are encouraged to use the time allotted to clarify any points they consider material and address the determining issues. Certain matters are not normally material planning considerations and will not be taken into account by the Council in deciding on a planning application. Representatives should not raise any new matters without explaining why they were not raised earlier with the case officer. Please do not repeat what is in the report, as members will have already read the report. After all the representations have been heard, the meeting is then in formal session and no members of the public may address the committee from the public gallery. The Planning Applications Committee will then proceed to determine the application, or, where appropriate, agree a recommendation to be made to full council, who will determine the application.
Thank you, Lucy. Did you put an apology for Councillor Witts there? He's appeared.
I did, I've noted that now.
Thank you. Can we go to item 4 on the agenda? The land between Nursery Avenue, Leafield and Springbank Road, Stranraer, 14/P/1/0494. And we've got Chris McTeer going through this one. Just whenever you're ready, Chris.
Thank you, Chair. This application is for a residential development of 158 dwellings and includes 40 affordable housing units. The site currently has an existing extant consent granted in 2009, and this application is a renewal of this consent, and there have been no material changes to date. Since the previous consent, the council's new LDP is in place, and the site has been included as an allocated housing site designated STR-H2. Therefore, this application had to be additionally assessed against the new LDP site guidance. Site access is taken from 2 points, Springbank Road to the north and Nursery Avenue to the south of the site. Springbank Road is a narrow single track lane and would require substantial upgrading to make it acceptable for access to the site, although this forms part of the Section 75 planning obligation for it. The Nursery Avenue access is currently dead-ended and stops at a small car park. However, it will be extended through a field and beyond, where the remainder of Phase 1 of the development and ultimately Phase 4 of the development would be located. Phase 1 of 20 affordable units are being built adjacent to the existing houses at Nursery Avenue. A condition has been added to the consent restricting commencement of development of Phase 1 until road widening works and inclusion of a parking lay-by alongside numbers 27 to 39 Nursery Avenue have been completed. Round the corner we can see where Phase 4 of the development is going to be. Phase 2 of the development is 32 units, 20 of which are affordable, and this will be accessed from Springbank Road. Phase 2 also has a condition restricting development until after the existing culvert on Springbank Road has been reconstructed and the road widening. Other conditions relating to surface water drainage, traffic management, etc. have been added into the consent, so we can see Phase 2 of the site there. That's looking back down into Phase 2, and then Phase 3 of the site is a linear development along a road running down the middle, which would link Phase 1 and Phase 2, and that's just looking across the site into Phase 3. In terms of the house types, the proposals remain the same as the previous application, with the exception of the affordable units, which were agreed as a non-material variation to the existing consent. So I've included some plans from DGHP. You can see how they're using split level houses as part of the site, because there's one or two bits of the site slopes down. Bungalow house types there as well. There were flooding concerns raised when the application came in due to the burn running alongside the eastern boundary. In the original application, the flooding issues had been bottomed out with SEPA, but in the interim period, SEPA adopted new flooding guidelines, and there was a change in Scottish planning policy overall. So flooding issues required to be addressed again, which has ultimately led to a bit of a delay in bringing this application to committee. As you can see, it's a 2014 application. The applicant dealt directly with SEPA to overcome the objections that they had, and in addition to that, there has been a condition added restricting development of each phase until after the submission of technical proposals for surface water drainage and this is to be agreed in the round between the planning service, roads as part of the roads construction consent, and SEPA and Scottish Water. In conclusion, this application broadly accords with the policies of the new LDP, and for the reasons outlined in the report, is recommended for approval, subject to the conclusion of a Section 75 planning obligation and conditions.
Thanks, Chris. Members, points of clarification. Ian?
Thanks, Chair. Just, I noticed you mentioned at the start, Chris, that there were no material alterations from the extant application given permission in 2009, but you mentioned the flooding issue and the issues that have been bottomed out with SEPA. Is that not a material consideration? I appreciate that SEPA seems satisfied with what the developer is saying now, but could you just clarify whether that is a material one? Could I also ask, just in relation to 4.25, you're suggesting that it's unreasonable to ask for an educational supplement in this case. Does that actually stop us for asking for an educational supplement based on, and could you give us figures for the catchment schools in terms of their capacity?
Yes.
Going to the sort of material changes first, normally where we're dealing with a renewal of a consent, unless there's been a significant land use change, the issues are, you know, of materiality don't sort of really apply. I think in this term, because it had been adopted into the LDP, it almost showed up the sort of the principle of housing development on the site. In terms of the flooding, the flooding issue would have been covered the first time round with the application, and SEPA were happy at the time. It's just that when the renewal came in, there were different criteria to look at, but still surrounding flooding. So I think the outcome was the same for that one. In terms of the contributions, it's I'm not sure whether we could retrospectively ask for it, but certainly the application came in, and it is noted on page 16 the reasons why we haven't asked for an educational contribution, given that it wasn't required in the first instance when the original application came in, and even the new application that we're looking at just now predates the adoption of that, but they still have contributions in terms of open space and affordable housing to have as part of the application.
Okay, Ian.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, just on that, I mean, I know on occasions when we change the LDP, we're asked sometimes to give consideration even though it's not in place. So I would sort of apply that logic to this case. But do we know what the capacity in the catchment schools is and is likely to increase by? Because that really would be I think a relevant consideration. And could we, in terms of process, ask or apply a condition for a supplement? But the capacity thing, I think, is important. We need to know if we're underutilising the catchment schools.
David?
Thank you, Chair. I don't have the exact details on the likelihood table for that with me, but as part of LDP 1, what would have happened is education were consulted in respect of all the proposed sites, so they would have been fully aware of the fact that this was an allocated site or proposed allocated site with an extant planning permission, so they will have factored that in and made comments accordingly. In terms of what's called Circular 3/2012, I think it is, on developer contributions, there is a requirement for reasonableness, and as Chris has outlined, really, that when we did look at this and consider it as set out in paragraph 425, because of the age of the application, because of the fact it was a renewal, we did think that that was unreasonable and wouldn't meet the requirements of that circular.
Yeah. David?
Chair, just kind of question Mr. Sutty on the basis that given the previous applications over 7-year-old, should we be looking at a renewal? Should it not be a new application?
David?
Again, it comes from the date. At that time when it was originally granted, it was 5 years, and the application came in 2014, so it came in time, and therefore it still has to be honoured as the part of the previous permission. If it had expired, it would be a whole new freestanding permission, but by virtue of the fact it came in just under the wire, it is a renewal application.
Jane?
Thank you, Chairman. I noticed from the report that it talks about, in terms of landscape fit, how dwelling houses would be visible from the neighbouring countryside. Could I ask the officer, we don't have anything in here about lighting, and I just wonder whether we would have expected to have something in the report about lighting in particular?
Chris?
In terms of street lighting, normally they would be, the actual lighting columns would form part of the road's construction consent, so it's a bit more, we're kind of looking at it in a slightly more macro sense for that, but the actual street lighting, there will be guidelines that roads will have for a certain amount of street lighting along a particular street, so that would that detail would come later on with the rest of the roads and drainage layout.
Okay, Jane?
I'm just thinking that I think we're about to slightly beef up our lighting policies. The idea is that we should beef them up and be more dark sky friendly with that sort of guidance that we use. And I just wondered whether we would expect to see that in the conditions here.
David?
Thanks, Chair. As members already be aware, the Council is rolling out LED lights for existing street lighting, and any new ones will obviously be that as well. But there will be no difficulty in putting in the directive that we normally would about looking for dark sky friendly lighting in any event. So I'm quite happy to note that.
Yeah, Stephen?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, on 4.3, it offers the policy considerations against which we should consider this renewal. And I'm noticing that at least 3 of them have changed in the intervening period, which would be the flood risk and drainage, design amenity, if you include design and streets, and developer contributions. But we're sort of being guided, I suppose, in the report to accept the flood risk and drainage one as being a change that we have in 2014 application or renewal possibly addressed. But the designing streets and the developer contributions, although they are current policy, we're being invited not to consider this renewal under current policy. And sort of echoing Councillor Dick earlier when we were advised to give considerable weight to the LDP as it was coming in, I'm a wee bit, I'd just like that clarity. When we're dealing with an application, whether it's a renewal or a new application, do we consider it under our current policy, or do we look at when the application went in and try and remember what the policy was then and consider it under that?
I think with because it's a renewal, we're slightly tied in that, you know, looking at the scheme from the outside, and if it was a new application, we certainly would hope that it wouldn't look like it does. We would look for a bit more design in streets sort of element with that. Because it's a renewal, we are having to, kind of look at it as is, and it was an application of its time. It was acceptable then, and we have to kind of look at the sort of the more broader aspects of design in streets in terms of sort of footpath links, road links, permeability of movement. So it's more a sort of it accords more broadly rather than sort of being designed sort of from a blank piece of paper up, which it would be if it was a new application.
Thanks for that. So, and just to come back, I suppose by extension then, if nothing happens for another 7-8 years and it gets renewed again, is it just one of these, because it goes in before a certain time, you always consider it under the previous guidance and you never apply the new or existing LDP?
David?
Because it's a renewal, it is to a degree sort of set in stone. That is the proposal that is before us. But there will be things that will change around it, and that's inevitable. I think the point that we're making about there being no material alterations, the actual proposal itself hasn't changed, but some of the issues have changed around it. Now, flooding is a material consideration which we really had to give extra cognizance to, because SEPA had come back in and said that what they had previously had submitted wasn't fit for their purposes, and they wanted to be satisfied that basically it wasn't going to be a development that was at risk. So I think that was something of a material change, which is why we've had to look through that very carefully. The bit about the developer contributions and the designing streets and so on, that is something that's a little bit different. Designing streets, because the permission is still technically valid, they can actually implement that now, and we are bound by that layout. We could have, it's all or nothing really, we either accept it or say that we don't think this is according with the council's requirements these days, in which case you could refuse it, but what we're saying is we don't think it is so far away from the current requirements that you would need to do that.
Tom?
I mean, just to get this one put to bed, we changed the contribution criteria back in 2014. Is that correct? We didn't implement it till June of this year.
No, the LDP came in September 2014, right. And for the first time there was what's called policy OP3 on developer contributions. That was fairly shortly afterwards followed up by one piece of supplementary guidance. That supplementary guidance was reviewed and brought into place in June this year, and that's the one that actually included education.
Tom?
So when did this renewal come in? Was it before or after we adopted the LDP in 2014?
Sorry, I missed that. When did what come
when did this application for renewal come in?
2014.
Yes, but when?
Good point. It was September 2014 was the adoption of the plan. I honestly don't have the date of when that one came in.
Because
looking at the numbering of it, it would be relatively late in the year, I would think.
There's a very argument being made by Councillors Dick and Thompson. If we didn't adopt the LDP till September 2014, and that came in after that, then maybe what they're arguing is relevant. If that application came in before September 2014, then obviously the status quo would prevail.
Just to be clear, we are still looking for developer contributions as is set out on page 17 in terms of things such as the road widening, the 20% affordable housing and the open space. Now they were all things which were covered by policy OP3 in the LDP and then the supplementary guidance which came in. The education thing, as I say, only came in June this year.
Yeah. Jim?
It's just about the last point that David raised about public open space. On page 17, the recommended decisions, section 75 and paragraph 3, a requirement confirming that the applicant will maintain all public open spaces. We've run into a lot of difficulty with applicants eventually passing on ownership or factoring arrangements not working. Are we sure that section 75 will actually tie down for a long period of time the arrangement for the maintenance of these open spaces?
Section 75 is run with the land, so they actually would form part of the title deeds. We can never say never, unfortunately, because some things do change, but the best tool in the planning toolbox to actually secure maintenance would be as set out in recommendation 3 of the Section 75 planning obligation heads of terms.
Can I come back, John? The only thing is it says the applicant, and I would have thought it'd been successive owners or whatever, so that it becomes more prescriptive.
Again, Chair, it runs with the land, so whoever the end developer or landowner is, it would be covered.
Jim?
Thanks, Chair. A couple of points. The flood retention strategy, has a final decision been made as to whether it will be one large flood retention basin or a succession of smaller ponds?
Sorry, Chair. No, there's no decision been made on that as yet. It's between those two options, but that detail still needs to be agreed when the phasing comes in for that.
Thank you. And the second point, Chair, are we seeking a developer contribution for upgrading waste management facilities?
I take it you mean foul drainage into the site?
No, waste management facilities. We are entitled, I believe, to seek a developer contribution for that?
David?
We are entitled to seek it. We haven't actually sought it in this instance.
Ivor?
Chair, it's just a sort of factual thing. Why did it take nearly 2 years to come here? Was the flood risk, when we actually validated this application, a material change, and was information there? So did we actually validate something that we didn't have the fullest of information for?
David?
In terms of the legislation, we basically have to validate an application if it meets minimum checklists, such as filling in the form, having the fee. If it doesn't have secondary information, then we have to request that after validation. In terms of why this one took so long, there's a number of reasons behind it. Unfortunately, it's I think Chris is about the third or fourth case officer with this particular application. It's got passed as various officers have retired or left. So that one has taken a long time, I'm afraid, but certainly we cannot require all the information we need at the outset. We can hit it with what's called a Regulation 24 letter requiring the extra information, which is what's regularly done.
Ian?
Thank you, Chairman. Very briefly, there was some discussion about when the application was actually received. Page 20 shows a number of drawings and the proposed block plan received on the 21st of August 2014, which would indicate it was at or around that time.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, that was very useful. So, in fact, it was just before the adoption of the LDP then.
Right. No other members? And Archie? Andy?
Thanks, Chair. I'm just going back to the education thing here, and I'm a bit at a loss to understand why we're not looking at a contribution towards education costs here, because given the rationalisation of small schools, Shuken Primary School must surely be affected. If one of the other things we would put, if this was successful, and I'm not prejudging it at this time, is if we're requiring to put in children's play equipment and amenity space for children, surely then we need to look at the effect on the only primary school in that area. The secondary school is a bit of a red herring because there only is one the catchment area for that. But Shuken Primary School, I think, is the primary school catchment primary school for that area. And to put 158 dwelling houses in there, surely that must have an effect on Shuken Primary School.
David?
Chair, I can only really reiterate what I had said earlier, which is the fact that this is a renewal application. The education section would have been consulted during the LDP process and would have been aware of this. However, as ever, it is open to members to make a different decision to what we're recommending, and if it is felt appropriate to put that on. Obviously, you should bear in mind that our advice is it would not be reasonable to do so, and therefore any such decision may be challengeable.
Thanks for the clarity.
Tom?
Well, I think as Ian pointed out there, if this application came in before we adopted the new policy, then the question of an education issue doesn't come up. Because that's what we should be judging on, whether it's a new application or a renewal. If this application was received by us in August and we changed the policy in September, that is backdating it, if you like. I mean, if we haven't got a clarity in, I mean, I'd feel very, very unsafe if somebody was to move that we made the developer pay an education contribution if that wasn't a live issue at the time the application came in. And therefore, if we have no definitive dates, can I suggest this be continued? Because if we're going to get into the realms of making decisions without having all the necessary evidence here, then I think that'd be totally wrong.
Jane?
Well, I was just going to say, I think we're drifting off into the debate and we haven't heard the objectors yet. So I think if we could do that, perhaps.
Certainly. Right, got no more. Yeah, prepared. We've got a prepared statement here for Clark Preston. Some of you may remember he was acting as an agent before and he's profoundly deaf and went to abandon the meeting. Went to abandon the meeting so that he could get his questions prepared in there. So Lucy's got to read out a statement he has put in. Andy?
Thanks. I just want some clarity from governance in actual fact. I totally take Councillor McClung's point here. If the point, McCautry, sorry, Tom. If in fact, if we're thinking it's before or after, we need to know it's before or after. And if that's the case, should we be hearing anything at all until we've got that clarity? That's my point.
Sorry, Chair, there's a danger of misdirecting yourselves here as a committee, because this is a 2009 extant planning permission. So the date of when things come in for this current application to some degree are almost irrelevant. You're talking about a permission that dates back to 2009 that is still live. The application came in, as far as we can tell, in August, immediately prior to the LDP's adoption. But therefore, that is a renewal application for something which dated back to 2009, where there's no ambiguity about what the policies were at that time, and there were no developer contribution policies in 2009.
Right, thank you. Members clear on that now. Lucy.
This is a proposed housing development of 157 houses on a steeply elevated hill with the probability of severe flooding issues, but also access to the site regarding road safety, and respectively ask the Planning Committee to consider a site visit for members to familiarise themselves with the site layout and surrounding area, to give members the opportunity to examine the complex issues on how these would impact on the community. This planning application has been ongoing for 2 years, 27 months, due to flooding concerns to nearby houses raised by SEFA, Flood Risk Management Team and the local residents. An email from Peter Barker, former senior planner, asking SEPA to remove their objection, which was declined due to potential flooding to houses. SEPA objected on 3 separate occasions regarding flooding issues, lastly on 9/11/2015, but on 4/12/2015 removed their objection after a meeting with Robert Duncan, who's the major development planning manager, on the 20/11/015. I can confirm from the planning application website no further information was submitted in this time period raising concerns why SEPA removed their objection. I will also confirm that the Flood Risk Management Team objected to twice maintaining their objection due to potential flooding issues on 12/11/2014 and 17/11/2015. The said objection remains a valid objection due to flooding issues. Please read both letters from FRMT. Leswalt High Road, Springwell Road and Nursery Avenue are not suitable for heavy construction traffic and plant machinery, with the roads already congested with parked cars, thus also being the route to the nearby Shuken Primary School. Regarding flooding issues raised, who will be held to account for the flooding of houses, which is inevitable if this application is approved? Who will fit the bill for those local residents when flooding occurs, and also higher insurance premiums thereafter? When flooding occurs, whose door are we knocking on? This land was allocated for development in the previous local plan, insert maps, but is simply not suitable for housing on this scale. There is flooding history in this part of town, and if the proposed water tanks are fit for purpose, why are they not being implemented elsewhere with flooding problems such as the nearby King George V playing fields, Dumfries, Newton Stewart, etc.? What is the sound level of such water tanks that operate by generator close to local residential houses? Concerned residents at the Liddesdale Road, Springbank Road junction have been told by the developer that part of their gardens would have to be given up for road widening. I can confirm on behalf of the residents that they have no intention to giving any of their garden ground for road widening development, nor should they be intimidated into doing so either. There are plenty of areas around Stranraer that are not on or near a floodplain in which this development could be relocated. The land above this proposed project is swampland flooded throughout the year, with 3 local water courses exit downhill via the proposed development flooding in the hollow basin downstream adjacent local houses. This land is now owned by the Woodland Trust, whom recently have created large ponds, which is home to ducks and swans, directly behind the application site. Water is the most powerful natural element which can cost large sums of money and misery to the community, which we have seen on television this week in Devon and other places. I cannot understand why we would want to have this on our doorstep when it can be avoided. I would also like to refer to the proposed site plan and in particular the site cross sections AA, CC, DD, EE, in which can only be described as being extremely vague. The site plan has floor levels for each house, but does not demonstrate where they relate to. Why do no levels relate to the existing road on Nursery Avenue and the existing footpath adjacent to Laburnum Grove, both of which are existing and to remain? The sections are extremely inaccurate as the ground
30
slopes
seconds, Lucy.
steeply up some 2+ metres high over a short distance from both the road at the top end of Nursery Avenue and from the footpath at the bottom of Laburnum Grove. This embankment is not shown on the sectional drawings and is very inaccurate and misleading. Why no heights, levels or datum points shown on the cross sections? In viewing the site sections, even though vague, it is very evident that an extreme amount of excavation work is required to shelf and retain the proposed houses with
Had your 5 minutes, Lucy.
containing 3 walls, metres in height.
Only a wee bit to go. Members, David will try and answer any questions. No, I probably won't. Any questions in that? And
It's kind of procedural thing, Chair. I appreciate the position the complainant's in, but could this not have been incorporated into the papers so that we could sit and read it? Because to try and take in a 5-minute and look seriously at the person's objections doesn't seem to me.
That's what he was going to be reading out. He put in that he was going to come to the meeting, but after the problems the last time, that's a statement he was going to be reading out.
Yeah, but the thing is,
but he wouldn't have been able to put in the papers if he had come along to the meeting to read that statement out.
Yeah, exactly, but he'd have been able to answer any questions we might have.
He wouldn't have been able to answer the questions because that's the reason he put the statement in. That's the problem we had the last time. None. We have John Tarry, please. Objector.
Thank you for...
You've got 5 minutes, John, and I'll let you know 30 seconds to go. It's whenever you're ready.
Thank you for allowing me to come here and put my objections. The main objection is that from a far distance, the hill concerned doesn't look too steep. But when you go there, I visited it last Saturday. I was amazed that the drop from the hill down towards Laburnum Road and towards Nursery Avenue was quite more than I anticipated. It's probably somewhere in the region of 45 degrees. It also falls away on both sides of the hill, and on the Nursery Avenue side, I found a huge crater which must be 4 or 5 feet deep and a large area covering. I think the main thing is that Laburnum Road, Grove, have already got some form of fencing to stop flooding, but with that amount of water coming off, because water is one of the most powerful common element we have, combined with the wind in the right direction, it can cause an awful lot of havoc. It also can cause misery to the people who are going to occupy the houses. And also, on another aspect, because with the danger of flooding, which I think if you put those houses there, it's going to increase, then their insurance will go up tremendously. 'Tremendously. 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 'Tremendously.
the best thing I can advise and ask you to do is to go to a site visit and see the conditions yourself.
Is that it? Thanks very much, John. Members? You take your seat, John.
You can go back to your seat.
As we don't have any, the applicant is not here. David, could you read out a letter from an email from an elected member?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Willie Scobie had intimated that he would like to have been here, but has an alternative meeting going on at the same time. But he has passed on a request, similar to Mr. Tarry, that the committee visit the site before determining the application.
Thank you, David. Members, announce session. Archie?
Thanks very much. Excuse me. Thank you very much, Chair. This is an application, as I said before, it came in 2008, was and completed 2009, and it was re-established because of differences in LDP. I sometimes worry about these things, you know. I think if people just go in with a JCB and start them, at least it's in perpetuity then, like, you know, and it causes us a load of problems. I'm of the opinion of listening to the questions that members asked before and the answers that were given by the officers, that I don't think we have any other option but to go with the application and go with the recommendations within the report itself. So I would move we do that, Chair.
That's it. Any other members? No. Ian?
I would agree with Archie's logic in that. I was at the original application and questioned quite thoroughly on the issue of flooding, and I think it's covered in conditions here. Flooding and roads obviously were the big issues at the time. I'm satisfied they're covered. I'm well aware that this is an extant permissions. No material changes. I don't think we've any option.
Right. That's fine. Lucy?
And I can confirm that members have agreed to go with the recommendation, which is to approve, subject to A, the successful completion of Section 75 obligation within 6 months of the date of the decision, or such other reasonable extended timescale as agreed by the appointed officer, and B, conditions.
Thank you. Can we go to item 5 in the agenda? The Smugglers Inn, 9013 Main Street, Auchencairn, Castle Douglas, 16/B/2/0182. Unfortunately, Mary Mitchell can't manage, but we've got Pat here to go through the thing. Whenever you're ready, Pat.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just run through some of the images and the photographs first of all. This is the location plan showing the site in red within the town centre or the village centre, I should say, of Auchencairn. This is looking closer at the application site itself, and you can see that the building is tight to the main street with a large garden to the rear, and there is a shared parking area to the southwest of the site. Apologies for the quality of some of these drawings that are coming through next. This is showing the existing site plan and the proposed site plan showing again a shared parking area to the left-hand side of the site, and a subdivision of the garden to provide amenity space for both dwelling houses. The existing ground and first floor plans show that originally, when it was built, this was 2 dwelling houses that were subsequently converted into a pub, but it has been a pub for a very, very, very long time. Exact length, I don't know. Proposed plans, existing and proposed second floor and cellar floor plans. Existing front and rear elevations. You can see that in the rear elevation at the top that there is a rather unfortunate the proposed front and rear elevations with the rear extension shortened and with a pitched roof put onto it. Existing side elevations, again showing the change to the extension. And these are the photographs. Parking area in the foreground. You can see the flat-roofed extension just behind the bush in the foreground. And moving closer. And this is around the rear of the property now. And that's all the photographs. In terms of this listed building, it's a Category C listed building, the proposal would be beneficial in bringing the building back into some use. The pub has been closed since early 2015, I believe. And again, in terms of the listed building, it would be beneficial in improving the rather unfortunate existing rear extension. However, the key issue with this application is the loss of the public house as a commercial community facility. Council policies permit change to alternative uses only where, firstly, the facility has been adequately marketed, and secondly, where the council's satisfied that the facility is surplus to the needs of the community. In terms of marketing, the report sets out the owner and tenant history of the building over recent years. It sets out marketing activity, and it also sets out whether there have been any interested parties in purchasing the pub. The property was first listed in early 2015 at a value of £220,000. The marketing of the property then changed to offer options for leases. It then offered opportunities relating to 2 previous planning permissions for the site, relating to retention of part of the pub and conversion of part of the building to dwelling houses. And ultimately, in March 2016, the price was reduced again to £175,000. And in June 2016, the property was removed from the market, and the current applications were submitted for planning permission and listed building consent. We're advised that during that time there were 8 viewings of the property and no formal offers. In terms of the facility being surplus to the needs of the community, the developer has spent some time negotiating with the Auchencairn initiative and the Auchencairn Community Pub Limited, which was set up by the Auchencairn initiative. And those negotiations took place between March 2015 and February 2016, when the community withdrew from those negotiations. The reasons for withdrawal are provided at paragraph 4.9 of the report. And sorry, it's not paragraph 4.9, my notes are wrong there. I'm actually looking at the wrong application here, sorry, Chair. The danger of doing 2 applications at the same time. Paragraph 4.9, part of the stated reason, in addition to pricing conditions, was a waning level of interest in the community for the venture, and that the existing committee did not feel that new volunteers were forthcoming or stamina from the community was forthcoming to run this. So as a result of that withdrawal, the applicant submitted the current application, and since the application has been submitted, there has been some renewed interest from the community in trying to protect this as a community facility, but that is still at a pre-feasibility stage. And On the basis of the information that's been provided to date, it's concluded with some regret and on balance that the applicant has demonstrated that firstly there is insufficient market demand for the public house, and secondly that the public house is surplus to the needs of the community, and therefore the proposal is considered to be acceptable and recommended for approval.
Thanks, Pat. Members, points of clarification? None? Right. Barlow, please. Objector. You've got 3 minutes, Bill. I'll let you know 30 seconds to go.
Thank you.
Are you ready?
Well, I've been involved in the smugglers only since September of this year. I was not part of the first group of people who were looking at it. And we came to it then with a slightly different angle. Before, the previous group who were looking at it, the Smugglers Pub Limited, were looking to raise money through issuing shares. We're now looking at trying to raise money through funding, through grant funding. This was only, so we've approached already the Scottish Land Fund and the Leader, both of whom have been very encouraging. We've had a positive encouragement from the Land Fund to make an application. It's a shame that this has come so late, but the previous group tried for nearly 2 months to negotiate a deal on the pub, and it's fine saying that there was sort of exhaustive negotiations, but it ended up in fact exhausting the people who were negotiating on our side. There was the valuation that was obtained by independently by the Auchencairn community came in at 150,000 as opposed to 240 from the owners. So the negotiations continued, and only in there was a sort of standoff for a long time. There was no one would budge on it, and the community was consulted, and everyone said it is pointless going too high on this because its valuation is quite clear if you look at other properties that are similar in the area. And it finally culminated, in fact, in the pub group making an offer for 176,000 in the end was the final offer, which was rejected by the owners, and at that point the pub group withdrew. And I do know from my own experience that they were in fact personally exhausted. They put an enormous amount of work into this project, and they completely lost confidence in the whole negotiating procedure. And the statement that was issued at the end by the pub group was really a personal
30 seconds to go, Bill.
How much? My God. Okay, so I better skip on. What I want to say is that there's been the level of passion in the community for it is enormous. There have been, for instance, we put a blog site up. There have been 1,800 viewings of the blog since in the last 6 weeks. We don't want to replace it with a hub. We want the hub to be supported by the pub and the restaurant. It's imperative that the pub and restaurant continue in order that
It's 3 minutes, Bill. Could I ask you to come to a conclusion?
A conclusion is that this the change of use is premature, that we need more time to look at it, and it is the community is passionate about it, and it is total misrepresentation.
That's fine. To remain in your seat in case members have got any questions. Members, any questions? Ian?
Mr. Barlow, could you confirm that a formal offer of £176,000 was made to the owner, and if that was before or after the price was reduced to 170, I think it would be?
Reduced to 175. I can't confirm that if it was a formal offer. My colleagues nodding that there was a formal offer made. And it was simply, and when the price was finally, when 2 weeks afterwards, the price was dropped, and it was considered that it was just game playing, and it was not prepared to carry on with with the state of affairs.
Peter?
Thank you, Chair. I'm just wondering, why do you think you can make this project financially viable in the future when it hasn't been in the past?
Right. Well, in the past, I have to say that the owners put in 3 different tenants. We're asked to believe that from 2006 that there was a crash in the Scottish pub market, and the Smugglers was affected accordingly. But I put it to you that there were three different tenants were put in that period between 2006 and when it was closed in 15, all of whom failed. And they were really, it was kind of evident to the locals that they were not experienced and they were really not competent for the job. And there is no reason why. The building is inefficient. Its energy costs were £1,400 a month to start with. We believe that, particularly with grant funding, we would be supported. We've discussed this with the Land Fund. We would be supported in upgrading the building to a level which would make the building efficient. So we would put in a new heating system and insulate throughout, put in a new kitchen block. The current building has been allowed to run down. So prior to 2006, there was acknowledged successful businesses being run. And the most recent tenant, for instance, had only 7% uptake on the accommodation, whereas the average for the area is 50%, which shows a kind of a level of incompetence which is pretty mind-boggling. Their sales came from only 4% of the income came from the accommodation side of it. The accommodation should be the main earner, the restaurant should be the second main earner, and the drinks should be the kind of add-on thing or you don't expect to earn much on. In fact, according to the feasibility study, 50% of the income from the previous tenants came from wet sales, from drinks, and 46% came from the restaurant, and only 4% came from the accommodation. So the whole thing has been badly run, badly managed. It's still got in the original furniture, the original furnishings that were put in 1990. I remember when they were put in. They're still there. The toilet block has been
Could we stick to the application, please? Stick to the application. You may back your seat, Bill.
Right.
Thank you. Could I have Guy Pounder of the Auchencairn Initiative, please, an objector? And you've got 3 minutes as well, Guy, and I'll let you know 30 seconds to go.
Thank you very much indeed.
Just whenever you're ready.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Guy Pounder. I'm the chairman of the Auchencairn Initiative. For those of you who don't know what the initiative was, it was initially set up to raise funds for Auchencairn village projects over 12 years ago. It's a company limited by guarantee with charitable status, and it has some street cred. Some of the facts and figures you've heard today here aren't quite as we would see them. The initiative started to investigate the acquisition of the Smugglers in February 2014. So that's 2.5 years ago. And with initial discussion taking place with the owners on the 27th of March of that year. In early 2014, the initiative formed a subcommittee of villagers, led by 2 of our directors. We had the building valued by Shepherds of Dumfries. In November that year, it was valued at 150,000, some 70,000 below the owner's own valuation. Because we know that the owner's valuation was based on the prices that were being asked for hotels in Dumfries and Galloway, not the prices they were selling for. Shepherds were looking at what prices they were selling for. We commissioned a feasibility study, as you've already heard from Bill, and a business plan has been produced. Regular discussions took place with the owners, but no agreed price could be reached, as you heard. With the help of lottery funders and the Plunkett Foundation, the subcommittee registered a community benefit society, which it was intended would own the building and manage the tenants, as well as raise the funds for the purchase. That CBS remains in being. We therefore continue to dispute the submission by the owners regarding the commitment of the village to the acquisition of the pub. You've heard Bill's passionate support of the village and the pub. We have tried over those years, but without an agreed price, we are unable to approach funders, as the figures in the business plan are too fluid for a funder to consider. 2 weeks ago, the Scottish Government, in the form of the Community Land Scotland, gave a presentation about community right to buy. 2 of our members who attended approached the presentation officer and encouraged them to get the initiative to apply for registration. The initiative directors agreed to proceed, and I can say we are in active correspondence and discussion with Community Land Scotland. This is by definition a late application, but we believe we have a better than good chance of becoming registered.
30 seconds to go.
Assuming we are successful, we will then have 8 months to raise the funds, and more importantly, the valuation will be made by ministers' appointed valuer. This would give us a fixed price. In view of this, I ask that the members delay a decision about the planning application and change of use to allow the community right to buy process to conclude. I estimate that 12 months would satisfy this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Members? Right, thank you very much, Guy.
Thank you.
We'll have John Simpson, please, on behalf of the Community Council, Auchencairn Community Council. And you've got 3 minutes also, John, and I'll let you know 30 seconds to go.
Morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm the chairman of the Auchencairn Community Council. And we have a slight dilemma here, because the building that you see on the screen is at the heart of the village. And it does fulfil one of the functions that allows Auchencairn to be deemed a local centre in the local development plan. So we would like to maintain the building to offer facilities to tourists, the village, and others. On the other hand, we don't want to see the building deteriorate and become an eyesore. Hence, we're working as hard as we possibly can to somehow or another, even if it's with Mr. Hyland, the current owner, to try and rescue the building, the facilities that it offers the village, and to try and, if you like, turn the clock back to what was a very successful business. We had this was kicked off by the planning application, and when we had the village meeting, you will note on your thing there are 109 village objections, which is accounting for more than 50% of the villagers. So without doubt, there's a strong desire within the village to maintain this building as it currently is. The Auchencairn Community Council would look to the committee to help us protect this building and the village. We would ask you to look at the bigger picture and give proper weight to what we see as a community need. There's lots of work and support from the community to get and achieve this. And I would like to ask you to think and give us time to try and achieve our objective. Thank you.
Thank you. Members? Nothing now? You may take your seat, John.
Yep.
Dave Hyland, the applicant, please. You've got 30 seconds also, Dave, and I'll let you know 30 seconds to go.
Okay.
Oh, 3 minutes, sorry, 3 minutes.
You said 30 seconds.
No, 3 minutes with 30 seconds to go.
This application has been accurately and fairly summarised in your officer's report, with recommendations for approval conclusively confirming that the local development plan has been met to justify change of use. Since submitting the application, the property has continued to be marketed as a development opportunity through a local respected agent. Additionally, it has also been listed for sale as a pub by a national commercial agent. After more than 2 years of marketing this pub, no offers for purchases have been received. Recently, we've had inquiries from the property as a dwelling pending this application. A further party has expressed interest with a desire to rent the property,
but to date has failed to substantiate any financial viability. The inquiry from Mr Bilbao, stating on behalf of the Auchencairn Community Council, has failed to produce an offer, and there is no evidence that there are any funds in place to do so, despite the statements that he's made this morning. Your officer's report briefly describes the negotiations that took place between March 2014 and February 2016 with the Auchencairn Community Pub Company. There have been some statements made this morning by the objectors that are in fact untrue. At the time that we were negotiating with the Auchencairn Pub Company, they did submit an offer. We didn't refuse that offer, which has been stated today. We submitted a counter offer, which was very much the same but written in a different format. So much so that my wife and I, Helen, were offering to pledge £10,000 to the Community Council's fund to purchase the pub. To my knowledge, there are no other people in the village that have to date pledged to purchase that pub. An application such as this was always going to galvanise some of the village. And they've suggested that there are different ways in which it can be used as a village hub. That list is extensive, and ironically, most of them will require a change of use approval. And there is probably no better suited place for those uses than the village hall. The officer's report accurately summarises that the property is surplus to the needs of the community as a village pub. In conclusion, this is not about the closing of the village pub, because that happened 2 years ago because they couldn't support it. This is about opening doors for opportunities to put the building to a better and more worthwhile use. Consent to convert will provide choices, such as 2 dwellings or a dwelling on one side or the other, or a different use for the remainder. And it also gives a possibility to bring in new young blood into the village to use the schools. Finally, I respectfully urge the committee to uphold the officer's recommendations for approval, giving this building a chance for a worthwhile and positive future beyond that of a redundant empty pub. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, and if there are any questions, I'll do my utmost to answer them fully.
Members, Ian.
We heard from Mr Barlow that a formal offer had been made earlier, and then you quite clearly said that there has been no offer received. I was rather confused when you then went on to say we were made an offer and which we put back a counter offer. So there seems to be a bit of confusion as far as
I'm sorry if that was misleading. When I said that there was no offer being received, that was in fact from the latest group that have got together under the leadership of Bill Barlow. The offer that we did receive was with the previous group that subsequently withdrew their interest. The interest was withdrawn once we'd actually given the counter offer.
Okay, Ian.
Yes, I think I followed that. The one other point, you also said that the property has been continually marketed, and yet I understand it was withdrawn from the market some time ago. Could you expand on that?
It wasn't actually withdrawn. It was originally marketed from February 2015 with Bruce & Co, who are a national specialist in selling pubs. They failed to get a sale or a lease for us. And in August of this year, we then terminated their contract and placed it with another local agent. We've recently discovered that in the last week or so that Bruce & Co are actually still listing it.
Peter.
Thank you, Chair. So just going back to the confusion about the offers, can I just confirm that there was an offer made of 176,000 by the previous group that was then withdrawn, and there has been no formal offer from the current group? Would that be correct?
Right. That's correct.
Yep. Any other members? No. Right, Dave, you may take your seat.
Thank you.
Members, we're now in session. Jane?
Thanks very much. I've listened with interest from what representatives and the owner have said. And I think that we should realise that it certainly was well known in the village that negotiations were ongoing. I think it's clear to me that it has been a terrific and viable business in the past. We've been told what has been happening, though it's a rather sorry history, but it is perfectly clear to me that there is interest, and serious interest, from the community. And indeed, there has been serious interest in the community. We've heard from the representatives about alternative valuations of this property. I would draw members' attention to policy CF1, which says quite clearly that we will only consider alternative uses if it can be demonstrated that there is no viable interest. Well, in my view, that has not been adequately shown to us today. And we've heard quite clearly that actually, I would suggest to you that this community facility is not surplus to use in any shape or form. In fact, it's been greatly missed. And there is no better or worthwhile use than a village pub in this particular instance. So members, I refer to policy CF1, community facilities, in particular CF1B, that is to say the reuse of existing community facilities, and I would propose that we refuse the application on the basis that it has not been satisfactorily demonstrated that all other options and possibilities have been explored and exhausted. And I would place that, please, on the table.
Ian?
Can I just ask that, should the application be granted, does that preclude any further development by the community groups in order to purchase and maintain it as it stands at the moment? It doesn't stop that, does it?
Thank you, Chair. No, the granting of planning permission doesn't mean it's going to happen, obviously. It would have to be purchased by somebody and then implemented in due course. There would be nothing to stop other people continuing to have negotiations if that went on the market and there was no interest.
Right, Ian, Blake.
Yeah, I think I indicated before, Councillor McGregor actually mentioned that it was to formally second the motion. I think there has been considerable evidence given today that there is community interest.
I personally think there's enough time has passed to go with officers' recommendations. I mean, it doesn't. If we grant this today, it doesn't stop the community still entering into negotiations to purchase the property and to do with what they want to do with it. So I would propose that we go with officers' recommendations.
Ira?
Chair, I was just wondering if Councillor Maitland could tell us when the 12th of Niver is, because if somebody keeps coming next month and says, oh, I've got an interest in it and I value it different, just to give us an idea of, because I would think it would be unfair if we were to support Councillor Maitland's proposal to actually, it would be no time limit on this, because somebody could come every month and say, I'm interested, just to give us an idea if she had anything in her mind of when you'd actually finished negotiations and there was no viable option.
I would take advice as to what we can or can't do with respect to this from the officers, but my inclination is that actually it'll be perfectly clear in fairly short order whether this is going to fly or not. And at that point, when the community has been given a proper chance, because this is it, to do it, if it doesn't get going, then I can quite see that we should not be standing in the way of redeveloping this if it is not going to be used for the community. But I'll take advice, please, as to what can or can't be done with respect to putting a time limit. I suspect we can't. I think it's probably clear that we can't, but I'm happy to hear advice.
David?
Well, obviously, Councillor Maitland's motion there was to actually refuse the application. The applicant, if it was refused, has a right of appeal to the Scottish Ministers, which obviously takes some time to go through the process. And indeed, the other alternative is they have a year in which to submit a free-go application. So that might buy the time. I certainly would urge members to make a decision today. The request from some of the objectors earlier to defer it I don't think is a satisfactory outcome. It would either be one or the other to give some certainty, I would suggest.
Jay?
Thanks very much, Chair. It's one of those difficult ones where you want to try and help the community as they move forward in this particular thing. However, taking all things into consideration and listening to Councillor Diggle, I'm happy to second that we go with the recommendations because negotiation can still take part during that particular time.
Andy?
It's been asked, and I think David actually responded. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Alistair?
Thanks, Chair. To some extent, the planning officer's already preempted my question, but it was simply to say he's advising not to defer. But my question was, would it be competent to defer?
Jane?
I will say to members that I think if you're if you're going to go with refusal and then hope that the community actually manages to stand against the idea of somebody developing it into 2 houses with the change of use granted, I think that's most unfair. Actually, I think, and I would suggest strongly that we refuse it because of the information that you've heard today.
Jim?
I have a great deal of sympathy with the deferral suggestion, although David refutes that. I was involved with a community group for a long time that tried to buy a property and couldn't raise the funds, and 2 years later when it was acknowledged they couldn't do it, and in the meantime the property just deteriorated. I don't think it should stay like that. If there's a definite decision between yes and no, I would certainly support Councillor Diggle, but I do think we need to consider a deferral for 6 months or whatever, and in that time, if there are no positive outcomes, then we would have given the objectors an opportunity maybe to explore as much as they could. But there are real risks or no outcome by simply refusing this application today.
Ian?
I think by approving this application, we're merely putting another obstacle in front of the community that are trying to negotiate to bring it back to a pub, that we're merely adding to that hurdle. They then would need to submit a planning application to put it back to being a public house. I do listen to what David said about the fact that deferring it, that he would prefer not to defer it. I see a lot of merits in deferring it, I must admit. 6 months is maybe a bit narrow, but the community themselves say they should be in a position to do it within 12 months. And if that was feasible, and if it could be for planning reasons, I'd certainly be prepared to rather than a straight refusal, but to go towards a deferral. But if that's not possible in planning reasons, I would still support the motion.
David?
Thanks, Chair. I think we need to read paragraph 4.8, where the Auchencairn initiative set up in March 2014 with a view to purchasing the pub. They failed to raise funds and they withdrew from the application. And I think that's what we've got to look at. As I'm sure we all know that communities can want things, but it's difficult to find people who are willing to volunteer to help to run them. And I think that's probably what's happened down at Auchencairn. I'd certainly go with the recommendations, Chair.
Peter?
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I have a huge amount of sympathy with the applicant here. He's been in negotiations for nearly 3 years. By granting this application, we're not stopping the community negotiating with him at all. So I think, at some point you have to move on. So I reiterate that, I'd support officers' recommendations with no deferral.
All right, we've got a motion and we've got a thing. I'll allow Jane back in.
We haven't absolutely had a definitive answer from the planning officer about this 12 months. If we could have that absolutely clear. I will also say to members, I'll lay that to one side, say to members, let's be absolutely clear. You will be providing a real barrier to the community to maintain their community facilities if you give change of use. And I will also say to you that you've heard quite clearly today about the valuations. It's not about raising money, it's about agreeing a valuation. And the suggestion is that there is no market for a viable pub. If the owner refuses to accept a valuation, an offer, then you can see what's happening if somebody is refusing to accept that offer. You'll make it worse.
You want back in, Ian?
No, I think Jane covered my point. If David could expand on the developer.
Sorry, can I just be clear? What was the 12-monthly question that you didn't feel I'd answered? Sorry,
if I could come back in as far as that's concerned, you quite clearly stated that you wouldn't be keen to go down a deferral route, but you didn't really say definitively if that could not be done in planning terms, and I think that's the question we're asking, that if we were to amend the motion, rather than a straight refusal, but to defer for a period of 12 months to allow the community to negotiate themselves into a position that they could go ahead to retain that facility within the community. Is that part of it?
There's no planning reason why you couldn't, as a committee, decide to defer it. It does then throw it into a legacy case, which is a black mark against the council for the two applications, obviously, but we are supposed to determine applications. The Scottish Government now look at things which are over a year's legacy cases, which obviously we would then be in that case. It's more the fact that this is an application for a change of use to two houses. It's not an application for anything else, and you've got to determine the application that's before you. We've looked under policy CF1, and from the evidence we've received, we're of the opinion that the applicant has made a reasonable attempt to try and market this property as a going concern. Now, obviously, it wouldn't need a grant of planning permission for the community to actually buy the property and run it still as a pub, because that's its last authorised use. Even though it's closed, that's its authorised use. So they could buy it and run it as a pub. If they're wanting to do it for anything else, any other sort of hub activities which are a hybrid of something else, then that would require change of use. We have no application before us for that. So it's really just members need to be clear what we have today is an application for planning permission and listed building consent for change of use of a pub to two houses. That is all that you're considering. If under policy CF1 you think that the case has not yet been made, then you should refuse it. If you think that the case has been made, then you should approve it. And the deferral bit really just leaves it in this, well, to paraphrase the comment from Councillor Hislop, is that when's the 12th of never? It could go on and on and on, and then ultimately you come to exactly the same decision a year down the line.
Jim?
I think you need to wind it up, Jim, and I'll remove any suggestion or deferral, because on Jane's point, I wouldn't, as an owner of a property, if somebody else tell me how much they're getting me for it, I'd have a figure set in my mind, and that's what I'd want to sell or negotiate the price on. No third-party approaches to me. So on the basis of that, we might never get a reconciliation of the two figures. We need to move on, and that, on that note, I'll certainly support the recommendation or the motion made to approve today.
Right, we've got a motion and we've got an amendment. Can we go to the vote? Okay, Telly.
So we have a motion, and the proposer is Councillor Maitland, and it's been seconded by Councillor McGregor. And this is to refuse the application on the basis of what members have heard today, that there is viable interest in maintaining the premises as a pub. And we have an amendment from Councillor Diggle, and it's been seconded by Councillor Ryborough.
No, that's not that. Jane, can you give the word I need to put through, please?
I will, yes. Can I say, I suggested that we refuse the application on the basis that it has not been satisfactorily demonstrated that all other options and possibilities have been explored and exhausted. And that's to do with CF1B of our policies.
Okay, hopefully get this. Refuse the application on the basis that members are not satisfied that all options have not been satisfactorily demonstrated and that all other options have not been explored.
Yeah, it's still not quite right. I think it should be refused on the basis that it's not been satisfactorily demonstrated that,
yes,
blah, blah, blah.
that all other options and possibilities have been explored and exhausted. That's what I've written down.
Amendment, we go with officers' recommendations.
And the amendment, which has been proposed by Councillor Diggle and seconded by Councillor Drybrough, is to go with officers' recommendation as per the report. So to proceed to the vote. Councillor Martin?
Motion.
Councillor Dempster?
Amendment.
Councillor Blake?
Motion.
Councillor Dick?
Amendment.
Councillor Diggle? Councillor Drybrough?
Amendment.
Councillor Ferguson?
Amendment.
Councillor Gilroy's left. Councillor Groom?
Motion.
Councillor Hislop?
Motion.
Councillor McGregor? Councillor Maitland?
Motion.
Councillor McCoftry? No. Councillor McComb?
Motion.
Councillor McKee?
Amendment.
Councillor Syme?
Amendment.
Councillor Thompson?
Amendment.
Councillor Witts?
Motion.
Okay, would the chair like to exercise its casting vote?
The original one, go with the motion.
Okay, and the motion is to refuse the application.
Okay, we go on to item 6 on the agenda, the land at Irvington Road, Hollee, Kirkpatrick Fleming, Lockerbie, 16/11/29/BIP. And we've got Pat speaking at this one again. So whenever you're ready, Pat.
Thank you, Chair.
One sec.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Members may recall refusing an application for 3 dwellings at this site in September 2015 on the grounds that the proposal did not relate well or accord with the established linear layout and character of the small building group. Prior to that, in 2003, similar applications were refused by the then area committee on similar grounds. The current application is unusual in that it is a proposal for 3 dwelling houses in principle, one of which is intended to be an agricultural workers' dwelling, and 2 further dwellings are proposed to finance the build of the essential need dwelling house. The location plan in front of you shows the application site just on the junction, or just along from the junction at Hollee, and the agricultural workers' dwelling is proposed for labour at Broat Hill Farm, further along towards Irvington. This is moving up closer and showing the 3 plots themselves. You'll note that the layout of Hollee is characterised by rows of dwelling houses on one side of the road with no dwellings on the other side. This is a block plan just showing detached dwellings and garages and 3 separate accesses. Moving to the photographs, this is looking west to the Irvington Road junction. And moving forward and turning the camera left to look down towards Annan. And again, you can see that the dwelling houses are all on one side of the road with nothing on the other, just forestry on that side. Turning around again to look along Irvington Road towards Irvington, again you can see that the small building group is characterised by dwellings on one side of the road and not the other. The application site is on the right-hand side, just beyond the gate and the hedge. This is stepping over and looking over the gate along the field. I think it should be noted that the field does not have any existing topographical stop to show where the application site is intended to end. The field just carries on and on. This is a reverse view looking back along Irvington Road towards the junction. And again, stepping over, you can see the application site sits approximately between the house in the distance and very approximately by the van that you can just see behind the telegraph pole. So again, you can see that there's no topographical stop to indicate where the application site lies. The proposal to erect dwellings at this site has been refused twice before on the grounds that the proposal did not relate well to the existing character of development at Hollee. Whilst Hollee is identified in the LDP as a small building group, the previous plan identified the only suitable site in Hollee as being further to the east. The current application, as I said before, is for 1 agricultural workers dwelling and 2 dwellings to finance its construction, which is quite an unusual approach. The council does not have an enabling policy that would allow cross-funding of one development with another. And Scottish planning policy only supports that type of enabling development where it would prevent the loss of a listed building. And clearly that doesn't apply here. The proposal is therefore unacceptable on these grounds alone, as set out in the report. Furthermore, the case for essential need for an agricultural worker at this site has not been made. The labour requirement report that was submitted with the application has a disclaimer saying that no third party should rely on it, and as such no weight can be given to that report. Notwithstanding, the applicant does suggest that the house is essential for improving security, improving animal welfare and safeguarding the farm from biosecurity threats. However, the additional security offered by this particular site, remote from the steading range at Broke Hill, over and above the 2 farmhouses that exist at the steading, would be minimal at best. And in terms of animal welfare and biosecurity, again, it's not clear how a 3rd farmhouse which is remote from the steading, would support that. So overall, it's not been demonstrated that there is an essential need for 3 dwellings at this site. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Members, points of clarification? None. Caroline Cruikshank, an objective, please.
Thanks.
You've got 3 minutes, Caroline. I'll let you know 30 seconds to go.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I have tried to keep this short and simple as I have little to add to what has already been mentioned in the objections submitted, and all of the reasons why it should be refused permission are down in black and white in the committee report. I would, however, like to emphasise that any development on this proposed site would in no way enhance the existing group of buildings and would simply change the whole character of Hollee. It would be a completely new row of housing, as there is currently none on that side of the road. The ones that you can see on that picture at the moment, they're actually on the main road, which is a different road to where they want to build these ones. And this goes against the criteria in the D&G policy. I would also like to draw your attention to item 415 in the committee report that states the council does not have an enabling policy to support developments of this nature, neither would it be supported by Scottish planning policy. Even if it were proven further housing is required for an agricultural worker, the development still wouldn't comply with the policy guidance and therefore should not get the go-ahead when there are numerous houses available for purchase in the area, including one adjacent to the applicant's own land, which is far enough from the actual farm to ensure safety, which the applicant has mentioned as a concern. Also, why should the small building group of Hollee have more agricultural housing inflicted on it when this proposed development clearly fails to meet the planning policy criteria? I urge you to please follow the recommendation and refuse planning permission. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Caroline. Members? Nothing? You may take your seat, Caroline. Could I have John Glendinning, please, objector? And you have 3 minutes as well, John. I'll let you know 30 seconds to go.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the committee. We are gathered here today just 14 months since Mr Halliday's last application, which was refused for a planning application at the same proposed site with the same number of houses, but this time with a twist. That one of the proposed properties will be for an agricultural worker, this being financed through 2 adjoining plots being sold for private housing. I would like to point out to the committee the last property to be built in Hollee was for Mr Halliday himself as an agricultural worker associated with the farm. The property is now in private ownership. In Mr McCall's letter dated 19th of October 2016, he comments on a housing survey being carried out and all local alternative accommodations being found unsuitable for the farm worker for various reasons. And in his summing up in the same letter, Mr McCall points out that this application is not an attempt to obtain approval for private housing by the back door. With 5 other developments for private housing being built on Mr Halliday's land in recent years and a failed attempt last year on this same site, it's hard not to feel this application is exactly that. A very lucrative form of income should it be allowed to continue. I also feel that this proposal would have a detrimental impact on a small building group and the character of it, and I would urge the planning committee to follow the recommendations of the planning department and refuse this application. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Members? Right, you may take your seat, John. Can I have John McCall and William Halliday, please, agent and applicant? And you've got 30 seconds, and I'll let you know. Oh, sorry. You've got 3 minutes, and I'll let you know 30 seconds to go.
Thanks very much. I'm sorry Mr Halliday is not able to be here today. He's a shortage of staff on the farm, hence the reason for the planning application. If I can go through 1 or 2 points. Hollee is a small building group, and the proposal that we've submitted meets the first criteria of policy H3, and the planning officer agrees with this. If you go back to item 1.7 on the report, you will see that there have been no houses built in Hollee since 2002. That's some 14 years ago. And this is a fine opportunity to provide housing in this small building group to make it effective. But if the application is to be refused, there really would be no more housing in Hollee. In our opinion, the proposal complies with items 4.4 to 4.8, and the only exception is the lack of an established stop, such as a hedge or a dike. But surely the benefit to the community and the farming industry by approving the proposal far outweighs the need for an established boundary of that type. We're surprised at the comment in the last sentence of point 411 regarding the statement relating to the labour requirement report, as that statement is common in all labour requirement reports, even by SAC, who provide these reports for farms all over Scotland. And really, from previous experience, there has been no difficulty whatsoever with that. And I'm concerned that, about that comment. The Labour Requirement Report clearly states that there is an essential need for the dwelling house on the farm, as the two houses on the farm are occupied by the partners. The existing workforce is less than half of the Labour Report calculation, but the difference is taken up by an additional full-time and a part-time employee who work on the unit, including the wives of the partners who are available to the labour pool when required, and contractors are used also when required. A detailed response to points 411 and 413 has been prepared by the farming consultant.
30 seconds to go, John.
Thank you. And it's been passed to the planning officer, and no doubt he'll want to share the contents of that with you. Just to summarise the various points then, it makes absolute good business sense, particularly in the current climate, to use business assets to expand the farming operation. I mean, there's no financial return or gain on the capital expenditure involved in the construction of a farm workers' house. And because of this, it can have an impact on the viability of the farm. And release of the sale of land to fund this construction is good
3
business.
minutes. Right, thank you.
Thank you.
Members? No. You may... Peter?
Sorry, I wasn't alert enough. You say that the officer agrees that there is that it complies with planning policy H3, but it clearly says in the report that they don't say. I just wondering what evidence you have to say that the planning officer agreed with you.
Hollee is listed as a small building group in Appendix 1. That's where his agreement is in 4.3.
Fine. You may return to your seat, John.
Good.
Members are now in session. Archie?
Thanks very much, Chair. I've been involved in this one for a while. It's the same application, but with different reasons for the application coming forward. Each of the times that they've come forward, the same recommendation has come forward for officers to refuse. I have seen nothing that changes my mind in that particular application, and I would go with the recommendation to refuse the application according to the report.
Any members otherwise minded? No.
In relation to item 6, members have unanimously agreed to go with the officer's recommendation as per the report, and that is to refuse the application.
Thank you, Lucy. Members, we come to agenda item number 7. Erection of dwelling house with entitled garage and formation of access. Location plot 2, land adjacent to 3 Crannog Road, Lochfoot, Dumfries. The application type is full application. The recommendation is to refuse. The reference number is 16/P/2/0202. We have Case Officer Judith Turnbull. Judith, will you take us through your presentation, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just before I start, there are a couple of few amendments to the drawing list. I think that's on page 57 of the agenda. It's at the end of the report. These amendments are due to minor errors in the existing levels on some of the drawings, which was noticed and pointed out to the agent before the assessment of the application, so it doesn't affect the report or the content of the report or the recommendation. These are drawings, the block plan as existing, the block plan, which is the floor plan, and the block plan, which is the roof plan. So these are drawings Lochfoot 2, 001, 002 and 003, and this should be revision B. And the date is not the 6th of July, but the 18th of November for those 3 drawings. So moving on to the slides, is the location plan, which I've enlarged because it was quite small, to show you the location plan, which is to the north of Crannog Road development and adjacent to the site of a recently completed dwelling house, which was granted permission in 2015, and that house is now occupied. The rest of the development was granted permission in 2004. The application site was previously part of an agricultural field. However, it's been recently fenced off and excavations have taken place, which you'll see on the slides to follow. This is the block plan as existing. The site is tucked in behind the new dwelling. That's the new dwelling in the middle of the image, and would share an access with it from the hammerhead at the end of the road. The section and levels show the relatively flat area for the siting of the dwelling house and the retaining boundary wall between the newly completed house and the proposed one. This is a proposed site layout showing the position of the proposed dwelling house on the site and a section showing both houses. This is site layout and roof plan. This drawing also shows existing and proposed boundary treatments, which include a 1.2 metre high timber fence on top of the retaining wall between the new house and the proposal, and a 1.8 metre high post and wire stock fence, which would be to the field boundaries on the north and the eastern boundary. It's the elevations of the proposed dwelling house, single storey. Design and finishes are in keeping with the other houses in the development. The bottom right is the elevation, which would be on the Crannog Road side. This is the floor plan, a 3-bedroom dwelling with sunroom and integral garage, and that's the orientation it would be on the site. Moving along to the photographs, this is the view along Crannog Road with the recently completed dwelling house visible on the far right. The application site is to the rear of that, even more to the right and out of the image, but moving along to the hammerhead at the end, this is the view towards the site from Crannog Road, and I've marked in, so the access goes along the side there into the proposed site, between the access between the gable wall along there. That's me going along the access to the site. This is now into the site, looking south from the end of the access towards 4 Crannog View, one of the houses that's surrounding the site. This is moving back a bit along the boundary, showing a boundary with the recently completed dwelling house. This is looking towards the eastern boundary, which shows the extent of the excavation which has taken place to provide a level area. And this is a view over the site from the east towards the new dwelling house. And this is just along the eastern boundary. This final one is a view from the field towards the new dwelling, with the application site in the back. In the original application, in the 2004 application, the site of the recently completed dwelling house, that's the one in the picture, was designated as a play area, and this is discussed in paragraph 4.6 of the report. Although that site now has a dwelling on it, the area in the foreground in that image is open space, which remains available for a play area and is unaffected by the current proposal. In conclusion, this development is characterised by dwellings fronting the road along an established building line and each house having a separate driveway. The proposed dwelling house would not follow this pattern, would not relate well to the layout character and form of the surrounding area, and is recommended for refusal.
Thanks, Judith. Members, any questions for the case officer? Peter?
Can you just go back a couple of slides, please, and just show us where the access would be? That one. Is the access down the left-hand side of that house?
Yes, I'll just point it out. That's the access there, which would be shared with this house here.
Thanks, Peter. David? And then here.
Can you give us any idea why that land's been levelled out?
It says in the report why, David, but Judith?
I don't know, but it would correspond with the level of the proposed dwelling house. It's approximately that the right level. And the drawings would indicate from the sections that it is a flat site, so I would assume that it's been prepared.
Thanks, Judith. I'll get David to add to that.
Yeah, I think there's a bit of further background to that. From my recollection, there was an area of spoil from the development that was on that site, which was leading to surface water runoff that then resulted in our planning inspector looking at that as well and telling him to actually remove that. I could be wrong in that, but that I seem to remember there was an issue with that land. And indeed, I think there's some photos which are coming up from one of the representatives that does show what the land was like before, because it was just the spoil from the whole development.
Thanks, Joe. Ian?
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate that no one has got the right to a view, but the orientation of the newly completed house faces directly onto the proposed one. Is there sufficient window-to-window distance?
David?
Well, that effectively is one of the concerns that we have in terms of the layout and why it's recommended for refusal. Effectively, this is a backland development where you're putting a house behind an existing house that has no road frontage.
Thanks, Ian. John, and then Jane Maitland.
Thanks, Chair. Just like the application, Chair, noticed again that there's been no response from Scottish Water received at the time of writing. Has there been anything since that, or has been no response at all? Because this was something that was brought up at the last planning meeting.
I think we have the right to assume they've no objection if they don't respond in a certain time frame, but Judith, can you reply to that, please?
No.
David?
We do give them 28 days to make a comment, anything that was received after that, but we still haven't determined the application will be considered. Obviously, they will still need a connection from Scottish Water if it's approved, and therefore any developer would have to approach them directly. It is endemic. There was a meeting which we had recently from Heads of Planning Scotland, which Scottish Water attended, and it's fair to say they got a bit of a roasting from every planning authority because none of us are getting any comments at the moment, so we're not unique.
I think you referred to that before, David, and said that their claim was they didn't have staff to service the requests. Jane Maitland?
My question was just, for the avoidance of doubt, the plan that we were given, the location plan we were given on page 49 of our papers, does not show that newly completed house. Is that right?
Should it? David, apparently.
Yes, that's correct, because the Ordnance Survey won't yet have updated their base map to show that house, but that's correct.
Happy with that, Jane? Any other member questions for the case officer at this moment in time? Archie? No? Okay, in that case we'll come to our objectors. The first, you'll each have 3 minutes. The first objector is Caroline Clark. Just come forward, please, and I'll remind you with 30 seconds to go to bring your presentation to a close. Just whenever you're ready, Caroline.
Thank you. I am Caroline Clark and I reside at 3 Crannog Road, Lochfoot, Dumfries. Subject plot 2, 16P2 0202. Chairman, I thank you for the opportunity to put our case against this application. I and my family reside immediately adjacent to this site and believe this is clearly an overdevelopment of the overall well laid out housing estate. This proposal goes against the good considerate planning that has gone into this Lochfoot site, and as such, any relevant proposals should relate well to the scale, density, massing, character, appearance, and in doing so, be sympathetic to the local built forms. Policy OP2. Slide 1, please. This slide shows neighbouring properties and the graduation of height between houses. The proposed house, as per the submitted drawings, will be 1.85 metres higher than our home. Slide 2, please. The photo of the digger on this PowerPoint presentation may give you an idea of the height and impact this will have on our home. Property 5 Crannog Road has already been built substantially higher than our property, and as such, if plot 2 is approved, we will feel boxed in our own home. The proposed new build does not relate to the layout, density and design of the character and would result in the loss of open space, policy H2, i.e. 2 houses crammed in to what was initially our understanding of 1 house and a garden, i.e. background development. Drainage. The lower properties within this estate already suffer from drainage issues, and the ground around our home tends to flood when we experience heavy rain, which has already been exacerbated with the newly built property. Slide 3, please. Our home has already suffered subsidence in respect of the drainage issues and the water table rising and falling, which has in turn subjected our home to be underpinned. Another higher property, which has little or no garden, I feel will exacerbate the issue we already have, even with a soakaway, especially with ours being a lower property and with rainwater coming down from the field through the higher property, proposed property, our garden will become a conduit for rainfall. If this proposed property goes ahead, are we guaranteed that our property will not experience further flooding and possibly movement again?
You have 30 seconds to go, Caroline.
Policy IN7 flooding and development. The avoidance principle is the most sustainable form of flood management. Slide 4. I would respectfully ask the Council that they follow the case officer's recommendation and refuse this application. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. President. Caroline, can you just wait a minute there in case anyone has questions for you? Any members got any questions for the objector? In that case, Caroline, thanks very much. Would you like to take your seat again? We now have Ross McKee, another objector. Ross, you will have the same 3 minutes. Sarah, I'll give you notification in 30 seconds just to draw your presentation to a close, and just whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Ross McKee and I live at number 3 Crannog Road, which is just adjacent to the planned property here. I thank you for the opportunity to put my case against this application. I and my family reside immediately adjacent to this site and believe this is clearly an overdevelopment of the overall well laid out housing estate with tidy front gardens and private rear gardens. The proposal goes against the good considerate planning that has gone on to this Lochfoot site. The proposal to our minds is without any doubt overdevelopment, trying to get a quart into a pint pot, so to say. It destroys the visual amenity of the site and is a definite intrusion on our privacy and that of our adjoining neighbours. I'm looking at the plans and the planning report with regard to window, the only significant window overlooking our home would be a bedroom window. I suggest that this house, as 5 Crannog Road is, will be looking down on and into our living area and will also be overlooking on and into our bedroom. And as 5 Crannog Road has a WC looking into our sunroom at eye level, we can see the people in the house using the facilities, which we find very intrusive. I'm looking at my deeds of the house last night. The Land Register of Scotland, Burdens section, state that the following plots shall be used solely for the purpose of the erection of 1 dwelling house and only for the occupation of 1 family. The proposal does not comply with the Council Local Development Plan policies as highlighted by the case officer, nor is it acceptable to myself and my family. I would ask that the Council to heed the case officer and this planning be refused.
Thanks very much, Ross. Can you just remain a minute, please? Do any members have any questions for Ross? In that case, Ross, thank you very much. Take your seat, please. We now have Lawrence Wilson. Lawrence will be reading a prepared statement on behalf of Vivian Christie, Evan Christie, Scott Christie and Lois Christie. And again, Lawrence, you will have 3 minutes only, and I'll remind you with 30 seconds to go.
Good morning, councillors. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. I'll be as quick as I possibly can. This estate was originally designed by my consultancy, and we put a lot of work into it with Ronnie Irvin and Dean Clackworthy. The number of houses were agreed, and on the sites that we're looking at just now, it was also agreed with Ronnie Irving that there would be no houses in that area. It was to be public open space for the next preceding area to be developed. Now, we agree entirely with the report. It's a very good report, it's very thorough, and it covers all the points of this rather difficult site. I wonder if I could look at the photograph, the last photograph of the council's place. It's a section, section 2, next one, that one. Thank you very much, Mr. Sutty, that's kind of you. Well, looking at that, you can see that essentially what is happening is that the field has been cut out, the development has begun. People have started excavating this in anticipation of an approval. That is misleading the actual landscape there. In fact, the field on the right came straight over to the left-hand side of the photograph and was indeed, and is indeed, 1.8 metres or so higher than the adjoining houses. It would have been considerably more with the grass there. In your policies and local plan 1, you laid out the policies. You agreed the policies. And policy OP2, design, quality and new development, says that any development of this nature will relate well to the scale, density, massing and character of the site. I submit to you that this proposal does not relate well. In fact, it's very similar to the previous proposal because it's been in previously, this one, and withdrawn. I come back to see if we can actually get planning permission. If now we go on to your policy that you agreed in policy H2, housing development in villages, it says the number of units relates to the scale and sizing of the existing village. So what we're doing here is pushing more houses in. It does not on its own or in combination with other developments in the housing market undermine the overall objective of spatial planning. Spatial planning is being destroyed here. That is open space for the next phase. It relates to the layout, density and design and character and form of the existing village. It does not do that. Thank you. It does not do that. It is, as the gentleman behind me said, it's a quart into a pint pot. And I suggest that I agree entirely with the case officer's report. The last point in that policy H2, which again you have approved in the past when this was being accepted, the proposal would not result in a loss of open space. This would be one of the main parts of the open space for that existing, well-designed, well-discussed housing estate with Ronnie Irving at day one of that housing estate. It is being completely destroyed.
Thanks, Lawrence.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm very much obliged to you.
You just remain for a minute, please. Thanks, Lawrence. Do any members have Peter?
All right, Lawrence, just with respect to that landscaping, is that a cut and fill then, or is it actually being taken away? Is the stuff being excavated being put to the left-hand side?
It's been taken, generally speaking, it's been taken away, Councillor. Generally speaking, it's been taken away, but there is some fill there. I would suspect to indicate that there's a house going to be on that site. But you can see the field on the right-hand side. Those were the levels. We levelled the field, both fields. Those were the levels of that, and it would just come straight over to your left-hand side, and there's still some left at the left-hand side. That was ostensibly open space for Phase 2 Lochfoot. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Lawrence. Any other members for Lawrence? In that case, resume your seat, Lawrence. Thank you. That's us concluded.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Lawrence. We now have David Fallis, the agent. David, if you'd come forward, please. You've got the same 3 minutes, and I'll remind you with 30 seconds to go just to draw your presentation to a conclusion. And whenever you're ready, David. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to address the committee and take questions on some of the matters that have been raised already. I'd like to clarify one particular point that in the report indicates this was recently the field. It's not. The area's been portioned off right from the outset when this development commenced, so it has been fenced off as part of the development from the very inset. With regards to the form of the development, it's not dissimilar to as you enter into the estate on the left-hand side. There's a small cluster of properties there, that has the same sorts of juxtaposition of one property looking into the next quite close together. So there is within the estate already this sort of arrangement. Those ones may well have, they are served off a communal access and a communal access road. Because there's 3 properties, that's up to adoptable standard. Now that brings me on to the point within 4.5 of the report. It's said and it is repeated that this is a shared access and shared driveway. It is not. It's to serve this plot alone. It is not for shared. You can see from the situation, and if you actually look on site, it's quite distinct. The newer property has its own arrangements. This property will have its own separate arrangements. It's also difficult to fathom the rationale behind what is being proposed here as well, because, and it is material to the Council's consideration, because we're talking about policy here, we're talking about implementation, consideration of supplementary guidance too, that in January of this year, within this same village, under the guise that it was acceptable under the terms of H2 and supplementary guidance, the very arrangements that this plot has been decried for, i.e. the sharing of access and the sharing of driveways, was approved at the former Scottish Water site, which is just in the top left-hand corner of the drawing that you have here, if I'm seeing that correctly. Where there is an application was approved in principle for 6 dwelling houses, which are sharing access points, sharing driveways, and that was considered to be consistent with the terms of policy. So we find it somewhat frustrating that within 6 months in the submission of this application, there has been a volte-face about what is or is not compliant with policy. And we asked the committee to take on board its submissions previously, that it's here to mediate, moderate and ensure consistency of approach, consistency of application of advice and guidance, and to bear in mind that recent planning permission in arriving at the decision today. With regards to the works in some of the slides, there's talk about, Lawrence has made the comment about the fact they're already commenced on site. This is not the case. As David pointed out, planning enforcement have been chasing us to actually scrape and clear away the site. That
Can
area
you
was
bring your
used.
stuff to a conclusion, David?
All right, well,
please?
fair enough. I can answer that fully if the members have a question. To that
Thanks
effect.
very much for that, David. Thanks for being so prompt. Then members have any questions for David? David McKee.
Could you just get him to clarify what he was going to say there, please? Because this was supposed to be green space, which I assume, looking at the drawing here, Crannog Road stops. There's a house on the left. I take it that line is the fence, is a boundary fence for that part of the estate. Now, he's wanting to build in there. Can he explain why they've scraped that piece of land away?
You're asking for
Before there's any
explanation, the clearance of the
permission.
site. Can you do that, David, please?
Yeah, certainly. Either of the, go back a number of slides. When the development was taking place, the sites up the top end there were being used as a spoil for the cut and fill as sites were being formed. So there was a lot of excess material actually stored and logged there. As a consequence of the recent approval, there was a greater push to actually get the site cleared and returned to some semblance of order and normality. And that is effectively what the client has done, on the assistance of the planning officials, to actually get that spoil cleared out of the site. He's just merely gone away, got it removed, and tried to return the site to some semblance of a decent order and case. It's not a presumption. It's not the fact that we're trying to, get ahead of the game or anything like that. We're just basically acting under the instructions of the officials to get the thing tidied up. So if we're going to be damned for doing what we're being told to do, it's a sad state of affairs. With regards to the public open space, the status of this land and the position of it with that regard has changed as the development has commenced over the last 12 years. And as the case officer points out, the open space has now been assigned to an area of land at the other side of the other plot that sits at the field access. Comment has been made about phase 2 of this development. There's no intention of a phase 2. There's nothing in the local plan. There's no submissions to that effect. So I don't know where phase 2 is coming from and what open
David,
space
can
is
we just
required to
confine
serve
to
that.
the question that was
Yeah.
asked about the reason
Well,
for
fair enough.
clearing
It's
the
been submitted, as part of the case against this. I feel only fair that we should be allowed to answer it. There's no intention of phase 2, and it's not a case of keeping an area of open space on the basis there might development at a subsequent stage when it's it's unlikely to happen. It's a preserve of the
Thanks for that,
council
David.
whether that happens.
Thank you. Peter?
Just for clarification, I presume that the spoil from the original building plot was put on the greenfield site, and the council were wanting you to sort out the spoil. But is it not evident that in tidying up all the spoil, you've actually dug sort of a couple of metres into the hillside?
The situation with that, the situation with that is to make the situation safe. That was there previously, and the mound's, quite a significant mound that's been taken away from it. I think the photographs were just of the digger that was actually sitting on top of it. It was a significantly higher profile than is presently there, and it's been scraped away. So it's just to return it to, a flat and even site. If there are issues about water runoff onto plots nearby, if it was retained, if it was reinstated as it was, all that water will just pour down into the back of the plots and exacerbate the situation that you see that was there. So if anything, if permission's refused and it has to be used for some purpose, then it may well just form the garden area for that, and it's simple as that. Nothing sinister.
Thanks for that, David. Andy?
Thanks very much. David, when was that work done?
The works to level it off and flatten it out, etc.
Yeah.
It's been done in the last 3 months.
So that
it was after the house had been finished, the pressure was growing on the client to actually get the thing tidied up because they weren't doing it. The area that had been used as the spoil when they were levelling and sorting that site out for that property there was getting used and just dumped on that area as well. So when that house was up and occupied, the pressure was coming from staff that matters had to be taken into hand and it had to be sorted out.
Chair, that's not the question I asked when it was started and when it was completed. The question next follow on from that is, so what's happened in the meantime to put that into what it should have been to meet the planning conditions that were being enforced by the council?
I would expect David to be able to answer that when we get into session. Any other questions? Unless you want to ask David.
Well, I'd like that answer because that was the question I asked him. When did it start and when was it completed? And in the last 3 months is a long time.
David Fallis will answer that if he can.
I was not on site when the works were actually completed, so I can't give you a start date or finish date. But the fact is, it was in the last 3 months, etc. So it is what it is.
Thanks for that. Thanks, David. Anybody else for the agent? Thanks, David. Just return to your seat. Thank you. Members, we're now in session. Archie and Peter. Okay, Peter.
Can I just a question for David? Really, is the serious excavation has gone on for that? Would that not in itself require any planning permission? And if so, was it sought?
David.
Well, the overall scheme obviously has planning permission. I accept the point Mr. Fallis made that this was fenced off as part of the original permission, so it's part of the overall development. We did ask them to go and remove the spoil because it was having an effect on both visual amenity and the residential amenity of the properties by virtue of surface water coming down off that into the properties as we saw in some of the photos. So to be honest, I would have expected them to have removed it down to a level akin to this. If there was a much more of a slope across the site, that would continue to cause problems. So I'm quite comfortable with what they've done, to be honest.
Thanks, Peter. Ivor?
Yeah, it was maybe down the same lines as Peter's. Is actually cutting, where they've actually cut the back corner out that's just out of photo, is that permitted development to actually bring it down to that level? To dig a hole out of the land, because it's quite obvious that there is 1.5 meters that would normally sit in there, and that's not a natural slope there, that has been made by a digger. It wasn't there originally. In the original plans, was that to be cut out to actually look like this at the end of the development, or have they taken it upon themselves to cut that out to actually maybe alleviate the flooding problems, although I would have thought water coming out of there will come out more rather than running out of the, because there'll be no curtain drain round there to actually catch it. Now it'll just come in there, sit in, and either go into the one that's just been completed or into the other houses down the way.
I don't think it's part of the plan application, and I will ask David to respond to it, although the agent did say it might be converted into a garden or a larger garden for the property. David, can you answer Ivor's question, please?
I'm afraid I can't answer part of that, which is what was this originally meant to look like as part of the original scheme, because I haven't had sight of that drawing. But certainly it is the case that we did ask them to remove the spoil and take it down to a level. So yes, it's development, but it's development which was undertaken by our instruction to get rid of two existing problems. So in terms of enforcement action, when you require that to take place, very often that will involve development, but to undo development that's already been done.
I'm very satisfied with that. As much as you can be, I guess. Okay. Okay then, we're still in session. Jane?
Well, I'm inclined to agree with Councillor Dryber on this one, and agree with the recommendation. I do confess that I find the whole business of this having been part and parcel of the development, unless it was as somewhere to put the spoil and debris, I mean, I find that the whole notion of a layout of expecting to put a house here quite extraordinary. So I mean, I'm actually slightly mystified by the whole thing. More, I'm sure, will be anon, but given what I've got in front of me right now, I don't think we should have a house on it.
So notwithstanding your observations, you're going to second a motion by Councillor Dryber to refuse his application as per the officer's recommendation.
You've got it in one, Chairman.
An alternative view? Patsy?
I don't have an alternative view, but just looking at that, what happens to that bit of land now? If the motion is carried?
David?
Well, basically, it would be for the applicant to decide what they wish to do. Would they go for an appeal if it were to be refused? After that, it would be the case that it fell within the overall site boundary of the original permission. It's not identified for housing, as I recall. I might be wrong, Judith, but I think, was that part of the original open space area? No? So, well, as it stands at the moment, it's just undeveloped land that has had some works in terms of the topsoil scraping with it, but it would sit there basically unless and until some other alternative proposal came forward, such as including it within the garden ground of the number 5, which would be a fairly acceptable solution.
Patsy?
Give me, but it's slightly more than topsoil, I would suggest. Is this part of the LDP? Because, you know, it's a bit of a, I would think, a bit of a flooding problem now, because I think it's just going to sit there and the houses round about it are going to be affected. And I don't think that's very good. I don't know that we can do anything about it today, but I would hope that as planning officers you'll be looking at it.
I would have thought that would have been a civil matter. Well, the proposal currently is we refuse the application. There is no construction taking place there. If there's been activity on that particular piece of land that affects adjoining properties, that's a civil matter, I would suggest. David, you have advice on that?
The only thing we could look at, and obviously I'd need to speak to the planning inspector and see what works were required had it gone significantly beyond. Would it be something we'd be looking for some further reinstatement work to take it back to the previous level? Unless until I had that information, I wouldn't want to give incorrect information to the committee.
So on that basis, can we determine the application first, please? We have a proposal to refuse that's been seconded. Are there any alternative motions or amendments being put forward? If there's no, Lucy, can you just determine what our decision is, please?
For item 7, the erection of Dwellinghouse with integral garage information of access. Members have unanimously agreed to go with the officer's recommendation to refuse the application.
Thanks very much, Lucy. We come to agenda item 8, which is for noting. It's an appeal decision, and although our officers recommended refusal and we supported that, it's particularly disappointing that there's been a third-party decision that overturned that. Do you want to say something on that, Jane?
Well, I was a little concerned when I did see it, Chairman, and the reasons given seemed to me to be kind of odd. And I wonder if the planning officer would be prepared to enlarge upon their opinion. This was the same one as same sort of issues as other wind turbines that seem to be strangely, well, I think considered strangely, and I'd be happy to have some thoughts on it, please.
Thanks, Jane. For me, the problem is it's a challenge on the integrity and professionalism of our staff. But David, can you just respond to that, please?
Thanks, Chair. Yes, as Councillor Milton correctly noted, this is the same reporter that made the decision on Little Cyclone that some members might recall was a single turbine, that the narrative all the way through the reporter's decision notice supported the Council's view, accepted it was contrary to policy, accepted it would have an adverse effect on landscape character, but then in the final paragraph concluded that it would make a significant contribution to energy generation and Scottish Government policy in that regard, and that tipped the balance in terms of approval. It's very, very similar with this one, although this is for 8 turbines. If you read through it, it's 57 paragraphs with one exception in there that pretty much support the Council's position, accepted that it would have, quote, a significant development plan policy conflict. But then paragraph 58, he goes on to just suddenly say that it would have considerable support from national policy, national planning, energy and climate change policies, and including on balance, that these benefits outweigh the harm the proposal would cause and the consequent conflict to the development plan. So it goes along in the same narrative and then suddenly at the last moment swerves. Well, a reporter is entitled to do that. They obviously are accepting here this is an on-balance decision. He has weighed up the different issues but come to the different opinion to what we came to in terms of a council's view on that. That's obviously disappointing. There is one paragraph that I do have concern about in particular, which is, he says, even when one gives less weight to those policies where, in consideration of a commercial scale wind energy proposal, it appears the policy approach is more restrictive than is expected in national policy, there remains blah, blah, blah. I don't think that is correct and could be misleading to other developers to say that we have a more restrictive policy in terms of wind energy, because don't forget our LDP went through the full examination by a reporter. She made considerable changes to our wind energy policy. There is one element of the wind energy policy that is contrary to the Scottish planning policy, and that's to do with the spatial element, and we've recognised that, but the development management policies, the Part 1 section, is very clearly cleared by the reporter, and the supplementary guidance which follows on from that has also been through the Scottish Minister. So I am concerned by that phrase there.
Are you able to respond to that, David, or just leave it as is?
My view is that if the reporter had considerably misdirected himself and hadn't flagged up that it was an on-balance view, I think we would have possibly looked at the possibility of a judicial review, although they are obviously very, very expensive and there's no guaranteed outcome. What I have taken the liberty of doing is the heads of Planning Scotland have a representative that goes along to the reporters unit, the DPA's stakeholder group, and recently he was asking if we had any cases, and I did put forward our concerns about both that paragraph that I felt was perhaps a statement a reporter shouldn't be making, and also flagging up that there appeared to be a pattern emerging here with Little Cyclone and this in the same reporter, and just asking that be drawn to the chief reporter's attention. And I think that's possibly the best route for doing that.
Members content to leave that, and David maybe feedback what the outcome of his discussions were. Are you content with that? Jim McComb?
Thanks, Chair. Just an observation, Chair. A lot of time and effort has gone into the creation of a network of coastal paths in the Rins in an attempt to foster tourism. And this type of decision flies totally in the face of what local groups and indeed Dumfries and Galloway Council have been trying to do to attract visitors to the Rins Peninsula.
Thanks for that, Jim. That's a good observation. I presume that's one of the reasons why our officer decided to recommend refusal, why we supported it. So you're quite right, and that's the problems that we face on a recurrent basis. If members are content to note that, next agenda item is agenda item 9, where the appeal was refused, and we should just note that. That concludes the business for today. Thank you very much for attendance. Thank you.
Now, the Planning Applications Committee on Wednesday, the 30th of November 2016, could I make